Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like The Question, All Along the Watchtower, and The Legendary Links, and novels like the recently released Dark Space and the upcoming Alter Ego and Enemy of My Enemy, a Daredevil Marvel crime novel. It's Alex Segura. Thanks for coming on, Alex.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
How's the day starting for you?
It's been good. I could use another cup of coffee, but that will be a later thing. How about you?
I'm doing well. I mean, it is 7:42 in Anchorage, Alaska, so it's pretty early for me. But
yeah, good morning.
I do think it's interesting. So before we chatted, you were supposed to chat with somebody else. You were in the midst of promotional row. Is this for Alter Ego? Was that what you're going to be doing the previous chat about also?
It's just been it's like a convergence of stuff happening. I'm having a really busy end of the year, which is saying a lot because I'm usually pretty busy, which is good. But, Alter Ego, The Links, The Question, there's a lot of Star Wars stuff going on. So it's all kind of hitting at once. And
yeah.
I'm doing a middle grade novel as well, like a Bruno Encanto middle grade novel that's literally coming out the same day as Alter Ego. So it just seems like a lot of streams converging, which is not a bad thing, but it's a unique situation, I think.
Every time I did like 5% more research, I discovered another project you were working on. And I don't know how that was possible. It was like you were hacking the internet just to put different projects out there just to mess with me. You're so busy. It's just wild. But when it comes to the promotional stuff, I am curious as to how your brain works with that, because you do have this background. You worked in publicity and marketing in comics in particular for quite a long time. How do you figure out the right ways to promote your varying types of work and like your approach to it? Because it seems like you're very good at being out there.
Yeah, I try to be, but I think it's also, I think readers and other folks and creators, like they don't want to be overwhelmed. So I really try to balance the self-promo with promoting other stuff. Like, we were talking about the books I enjoyed before we hit record. And it's also like a cleanse. Like, I don't want to be talking about myself all the time. I feel I get exhausted talking about myself all the time. And the irony of being a former publicist is that I really genuinely loved promoting other people's work, because if it was something I felt passionate about, we were talking about this too, like it made it easier to pitch to a reporter or to pitch to an outlet or a podcast because I really liked it qualitatively. And I think there's always that imposter syndrome when you're a creative that you're like, is this good? Like, I hope, you hope you're putting it out in the world and you're hoping that people engage with it. So I try not to flood the zones in terms of putting too much press out there all at once, but I also try to do stuff that is interesting to me. Like, I'm a fan of this podcast. I read certain outlets. I go to certain websites. So when I get to engage with those places, it feels cool because it feels like you're engaging with someone that gets the material. So I guess the challenge is really hammer home the stuff that's meaningful, that I think is really important. Like, I did this really big PW profile, and that felt really special because it was a nice kind of overarching profile that looked at all my stuff. And then there's just turnkey interviews, not to minimize them, but you're kind of doing the grind. And so I try to minimize the grind as much as I can and try to really do the stuff that feels valuable, that's going to get to readers, but then also use those platforms and those opportunities to actually elevate other stuff that I'm reading and enjoying, or stuff that my friends are doing that I think is really great. I guess give back as much as you can while you're doing it, so it doesn't feel so much like you're just shilling yourself,
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because I feel like the internet is so decentralized at this point. If you talk to 15 different comic sites, you might talk to 15 completely different audiences. If you go on 10 different comic podcasts, you might talk to 10 completely different audiences. I mean, here's a good example. I think you and I actually go to similar websites. I remember I was reading an article not that long ago on Defector, and you commented on it, which I thought was super funny.
Yeah. I love Defector. Yeah.
Defector is great. Yeah, I have a subscription to Defector. It's like there's like a few sites that I have like subscriptions to. It's very like all over the place. It's like Fangraphs, a baseball website, Defector, The Athletic, a lot of sports related things. But
yeah,
trying to like find the right audience with the right message is really difficult. So it's like, let's say you have like an outlet you really like. Do you go to them with a pitch for yourself?
I mean, I will. Like the blessing of not being relatively new, like, having stuff with publishers like DC and Marvel and Flatiron, is that there's in-house marketing of publicity teams. But if I'm a fan of an outlet, I will 100% reach out to them and say, hey, I'm a writer and this is the stuff I have coming up. I'd love to talk to you, because I think also what you're seeing is publishers want you to do that.
Yeah.
They want creators to say, hey, I have a relationship with this reporter, or I have a relationship with this outlet. So I think 9 times out of 10, my publishers are happy that I do that. Yeah, so totally, yes. If I think I have reached out to Defector. I reached out to you directly. It wasn't something that was set up by any publicist. So I think that's the benefit of having that background is that I'm always thinking, well, can I talk to them? Is there a way? Is there a wedge here? Or other times I can just enjoy it as a reader, which is the true blessing. Like I can just listen to the podcast and enjoy it. A good example is I love the Cerebro podcast, which is a very popular X-Men podcast. I just listen to it for fun because I'm an X-Men nerd and I've had the opportunity to be on there. But, sometimes you just want to enjoy something too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, also, I don't know if do you have a single X-Men that you would rep for on that show? Because that's what the focus is, right? Like Connor Goldsmith talks to people about one X-Men that they're really passionate about.
Yeah, I did Sunspot. That was my first episode. I think it was pretty early in the run. And then recently I did Risque, who is an obscure Cuban American Miami character that was in X-Force for like a few issues and then showed up in Sword, which was a lot of fun. And that was like, I think the connective overlap is just, Cuban American, Miami, X-Men. So that was a lot of fun. And it was an obscure deep cut. So, I think that's where Connor's at because he's done all the big hitters. So a lot of it is now who are his guests super passionate about. But yeah.
I am curious. So I mentioned already, you've worked at comic publishers. You worked at Oni, you worked at DC, you worked at Archie, varying capacities, but most often in marketing. Do you find that your marketing brain affects what you do or even the jobs that you take on at all? Do you actively think about potential marketability when you're putting a project together, or is that just completely outside your brain?
I do think about it, but I try to keep it separate, church and state. I try to let the creative stuff just happen creatively. And then when the creative stuff is done, I think I put my publicist hat and I think about, well, how can I promote this or how can I channel this? Because I think the trend chasing stuff is only going to hurt you creatively. If you look, romantasy is a huge novel trend now. I'm not minimizing it. I think those books are really fun. And I think before that, there was the trend of like, doing the Gone Girl on the train type of novel. But I think once you start engaging with the trend or you start chasing the trend, publishing is such a slow moving beast that by the time your stuff comes out, the trend's probably gone. Or maybe it's not. But I think the key for that is to really just my shorthand is to just do the stuff that I'm obsessing over because that's when I know I'll finish it. I know I'll be so like into it that, novels are like, the most basic thing to say is novels are hard. It's thousands and thousands of words. And comics are really hard. I mean, finding a collaborator, especially in the creator-owned space, finding a collaborator you get along with and you creatively kind of riff on. So if you're doing something that you think is tapping into something that's hot now, it's not going to be hot by the time the book is done. It's really got to be something you're passionate about. And then that's when I put on the marketing hat. That's when I think about, well, what are the outlets that'll cover this? I don't think I'm an expert in any way in terms of influencers and tapping into people that are going to plug it on social media. But, what's the thing that's going to get people excited? Like, who are the people that I think are going to talk about this now that it's done, or at least it's like crystallized enough that it's become an idea that we're going to do,
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that's really tricky is like the trend chasing. I understand the instinct to do that, but
oh, for sure.
I think one of the difficulties, though, is what you're talking about is important because if people are going to feel passionate about your work, I think that you have to feel passionate about your work. And if you don't tap into that for yourself, if you don't find that angle for yourself, if you have to just like nakedly design it and just be like, I have to figure out what my romantasy is, I think people will feel that.
Yeah, if it feels algorithmic, it's just a drag.
Yeah.
It's just even the work for hire stuff I do, I've been really lucky to work on characters that I literally am a fan of. And I know that's a very clear thing. Like, obviously, if you're working in comics work for hire, you are a fan of the stuff you work on, but not always. Like, I just don't want it to feel like a gig. Like, I don't want people to feel like, oh, he's just cranking the stuff out because he wants to keep working. I obviously do want to keep working. I like to do work. But I think there's a special chemistry there when you really are passionate about character. Like, I love Renee. I think Renee is an amazing character. I've loved her since I watched, first showed up in Batman the Animated Series. I'm a big Ruckahead. Like, anything Greg does, I will be there. So there's a lot of overlap and passion there. And I think, there's times when people reach out to me and say, hey, do you want to pitch on this? And I'll say no. And I think the editors are appreciative. They don't want you to do a half-baked pitch just because you want the work. They want you to do it because there's something to say, and I think that's the challenge. Like, what do you say? Like, what do you have to say when someone gives you an opportunity to write a character that's been around forever? Like, what's the Alex Segura pitch for this? And I think I think editors want that. They want, I hope, I mean, they want something that's different, but that only you can do. So that's what, especially with novels, I tell writers, like, what is a novel that only you can write that blends the things that you are passionate about? And that's, to me, like Secret Identity and Alter Ego are, and not to guide the conversation into promo at all, but those are very much the synthesis of things that I love, that I have an angle into, like that I have something I can say that only I can say, which is presumptuous. It's like that very potent blend of like hubris and confidence, but also self-awareness. Like, this is the stuff I want to write about.
Do you think that there's danger in, like, let's say you and I are both asked to pitch an Android Hourman book by DC. I don't know why Android Hourman is always my example. Actually, I know exactly why. I love Android Hourman. That's the reason why.
Yeah.
I imagine some people's instincts initially is to aim for what they think editorial wants. Do you think that that is a mistake?
I think so. I mean, usually when I pitch something, I try to be honest. Like, I pitched something recently, and I think literally the high concept was like, it is not going to be this beloved, iconic run on this character, because I can't do that. Like, I don't do that. Like, it's not that I can't try to do that, but it's also just not my wheelhouse. And I think if you're trying to cater your pitch to what you think the editor wants, you will probably just be disappointed. Like, I think just, if tapping into passion and tapping into obsession and tapping into what makes you into something, I think that's the stuff. I don't bat 1,000 there. Nobody does. But I think there's also the breadth of my work is really like trying to get into like, what's going to get me to the keyboard? What's going to get me jazzed to write about this stuff? And that's the goal. Is it successful all the time? Probably not. And I don't think it is for anybody. But if you're trying to predict the trend, you're trying to predict what the editor wants, you're trying to predict what the publisher wants, then you're trying to tap into a telepathy that nobody has. I don't think.
Yeah, I do want to say this is all excellent lead into the fact that I say this with love and respect. You choose some wildly unexpected and even kind of arguably on the surface weird projects at times. They work. But okay, so I'm going to do a quick list.
Okay.
When I heard this, it blew my mind. Not only have you written Dick Tracy, but you co-own the comic rights, which I find to be really fascinating. I know the story behind it, so we don't have to get into it, but did that at Mad Cave. You wrote a comic fueled by an NPR podcast, which is spectacular. You've written thriller novels about comic creators, but then written actual comics that exist in the world of the aforementioned thriller novels. And the list goes on and on. Those are not things that just happen. You can't just be like, oh, I tripped and when I got up, I had the Dick Tracy rights in my pocket. That's just not a thing. What guides you when you're figuring out what's next? How do you decide this is I don't want to say like this is the idea, but like what guides you to certain projects and like what is your overall decision-making process? Because I find it very fascinating. No one does it like you, Alex.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate it. I think a lot of it is stubbornness. The thing that, Sadie Gerald and I talk about a lot is after the fact, after Lynx has come out and after Alter Ego is in the pipeline and Secret Identity is, we basically manifested this character, the Lynx, into comic book history. And so, a lot of it is obsession, but a lot of it is like, wouldn't this be cool if this existed? Like, wouldn't it be great if this existed? Like the idea of mixing obsession, but with fandom and with the meta of it all. Like, I'm a sucker for the meta story. I've told the story a lot, so I will give you the abridged version. But when I read Cavalier and Clay, my first thought was like, I want to read those escapist comics. And I was so stoked when those came to be. Like, and not only that they existed, but that Michael Chabon did it in such a way that he just treated it like it existed. And that's really what I make no bones about the fact that the Lynx comics are hugely indebted to the escapist comics because we wanted to write them as if they happened. And I can't tell you how excited I get when I get an email or I meet someone and they say, I love Secret Identity, but I cannot for the life of me find a copy of the Lynx anywhere. And it's just such a great feeling that they read that novel, read those comics, and believed in their heart or wanted to believe that the Lynx existed. And now it does. Now I can say it does. But that meta stuff like really speaks to me. The idea of I love Planet Money. So doing a comic that was an episode of Planet Money and having it come to life with someone like Jamal Igle, like those things that like you can explain and then add a layer of nuance to it just gets me excited as a reader. Like that's the stuff that I love. Like there's this novel, Soon I Will Be Invincible by Lev Grossman, and it's a prose novel about a superhero team. And I remember reading it and just being like, why doesn't more stuff like this exist? Like, I know it does, like IP wise, like there's always been like pulp novels and Spider-Man novels and Batman novels, but this new idea that exists in that genre didn't, it was just so fascinating to me. And those are the things that get me interested. So being able to do stuff that gets me interested is kind of the base thing that I always tell other writers or creative people, like, just do the stuff that gets you jazzed, and eventually it's going to get somebody else jazzed. That's the hope. And if it doesn't, at least you had fun doing it. Like even something like The Awakened, when Mike Moreci and I were talking about it, it was like, we want to write this murder mystery with the superhero team. And I know that is a bit of a trope. Like, it's basically Watchmen. Like, Watchmen has defined that trope, like the murder mystery in a superhero world. But, if you want to do something that gets you interested. And if you don't do it, if it's not interesting to you, it's not going to be interesting to anybody else. That's like the gist of it all,
Yeah. Do you prioritize one medium over the other at this point, whether it's comics or novels?
I don't. I think we're at a really exciting, like 50-50 moment. For me, I feel like it's exciting. Like, I'm doing a lot of novels. I'm literally like cramming on this Daredevil novel, which feels like a dream, like a fever dream, that I get to write this Daredevil thing. But I also am doing a lot of comic book stuff. And I don't think it will always be that way. And I think one of the few times I've heard creators be honest about the trajectory of stuff, like, is when I hear like Mark Waid talk. Like, he's like, I'm not going to be like the thing all the time. I'm not going to be the hot hand all the time. And so I always write with that in mind. Like, I try to savor the stuff that I'm doing in terms of work for hire, but I also try to keep a lot of plates spinning in the creator owned space, because you just never know. Like, you're at the whim of editorial taste, you're at the whim of consumer taste, but you always want to keep working, and you want to keep working on stuff that you like to do. Otherwise, I think once the fun gets taken out of it, and I'm not saying that will happen, but I've seen it happen, I think, creatively, where, writers or artists, like, it's just not cool anymore. Like, that's when you don't want to be doing it as much. It's just like, you want to do it because you love it and it's fun. Obviously, you want to pay the bills. I have 2 kids. I have an apartment. I have, things I want to do. But if it's not fun, then, you try to do something else, I guess.
And you got to keep Sasha in the good kibble.
I do, yeah, and I have to keep my kids fed. But, like, you have passions too outside of comics. I have passions too outside of comics, music, sports, different genres. And so you never want to get to that point where it's not happening for you, but you want to tap into that excitement.
I do think it's interesting. I think about Scotty Young and Jen Bartel as good examples of this. And it's not exclusively why they do this, but the way that they handle things outside of their explicit comic work. And Jen's not doing a ton right now, but I mean, like, when she was, it allows you to be insulated from like the whims of the market, the things like that kind of Mark was talking about, where it's like, when you're not the flavor of the moment, what do you do then? And like, it seems like you having novels and you having comics and you having a variety of other skills allows you to be kind of protected from those whims.
I mean, you hope so. You try to stay flexible. I think I hate to speak generally about publishers, but I think publishers, it's easier for them if you are easily pinned down. Like, oh, Alex writes PI novels. That's the bucket he is in. But I don't do that. I write PI novels. I write sci-fi novels. I think it's also like, you don't want to be bored, but you also don't want to just be easily pegged as this. You are that. You are that kind of writer. Alex only writes work for hire prose in superhero or sci-fi worlds, and that's a big umbrella still, but whatever you can do to not be pinned down will help you in the long run, I think. And also, like, keep you entertained. Like, how often can you write the same thing over and over again? I can't. You can't. I mean, you can literally, but you just run out of things to say.
Yeah. All right. We're about to get into the question, but I do want to ask one question before we get into it. It comes from a patron, Julio Anta. I think it's very fitting that he asked this, given the fact that you are 100% the first guest who wore a Miami Marlins hat onto the podcast.
Am I? Yes, I'm honored.
Yeah. Have you seen any Marlins games lately? There's not a lot of people there.
I will tell you, I've taken my son to numerous Marlins games. We live in New York, obviously, and so that means we go to Mets games. And he turned to me after the first or second one and was like, Daddy, why do we have to root for the losing team?
Oh no.
And it felt like such a critical moment, because I remember having a similar moment as a Dolphins fan. I was around before the Marlins existed. So you had to have like your team you cheered for because you didn't have a team. But I remember looking at my dad and being like, why do we have to go for the Dolphins? Like, they're just bad, and they weren't really that bad then. They're much, they went through a much bigger sallow period. But yeah, I mean, I'm a believer in like that's your team. Like you're stuck with them.
Yeah.
And it always felt weird to me when people would be like, "Well, I'm a Bulls fan." I'm like, "Well, yeah, because they're winning all the time." But what happens when they're not winning?
Not to take this on a complete aside, but I think you were probably pretty lucky because if you were probably an early days Marlins fan, and like the 90s were a really good time for the Marlins.
I mean, we'd win the World Series
97
every once in a while. Yeah. We won a couple times. So yeah, I mean, and the Dolphins were at least competitive with Marino. So
yeah. So that is not what Julio was asking about. He was asking about Miami, though. He said, as the biggest comic writer from Miami, he said, this part is important. The fact that you're the biggest comic writer from Miami. How did growing up in Miami influence your writing?
Well, I am flattered. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I will take the compliment because Julio is a great writer and also from Miami. So that's cool. I think the contrast really influenced me. The idea that you're in this tropical paradise, and it is a tropical paradise, but there's this like undercurrent of danger and darkness and menace that exists. And I think it's really the perfect setting for a noir. This idea that you are in paradise, but bad things happen in paradise. Like I find that fascinating. And I think it feeds into everything I do, even stuff that isn't set in Miami. There's always going to be an element of that, like that. Even with the question, like you're in this really cool, like sci-fi setting, but something not great is happening under there. And that's part of the journey. So
I do think it's funny, like the color scheme of Miami also kind of lends itself to noir, and I don't know why that is. In my mind, it's just like the kind of neon to it, where it's just kind of, I just think of that, and I'm like kind of thinking of Collateral, the Michael Mann movie and everything. Yeah. It's just, there's like this vibe to it, but well, I guess I'd also think about Miami Vice, but that is a different Michael Mann movie that I would probably not get to as quickly, but
yeah, but it's also like the flickering neon sign. It's not like something's glitchy here. Something's not working, and it's pretty and it's beautiful. But once you dig a little deeper, it's not a good thing to be. So.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors in Oni Press. 20 years, 7 evil exes, one huge celebration. Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life was released on August 18, 2004, and for the 20th anniversary, creator Brian Lee O'Malley designed some outstanding new merch. Pre-order is now open on the official Scott Pilgrim 20th Century merchandise line, celebrating 20 years of the iconic Scott Pilgrim series with a selection of brand new and classic designs newly remastered by O'Malley himself. Listeners of Off Panel can use the code SKETCHED15, that's SKTCHD, all caps 15, for 15% off their order of exclusive Scott Pilgrim merch at onipress.com. But hurry, this pre-order closes on December 2nd. And now, back to the show. So let's talk about the question All Along the Watchtower. It's your new DC series with artist Kian Torme, colorist Romulo Fajardo Jr., and letterer Willie Schubert. Here's the solicit. In the wake of absolute power, the Justice League Unlimited has created a haven for all heroes, but can they keep it secure? Enter Renee Montoya, reeling from an abrupt end to her time in Gotham and looking for a place to hang her hat. But the Trinity didn't bring her up to the Watchtower to relax. There's a dark threat bubbling underneath the surface, and only the Question and her ad hoc support team stand a chance of figuring out who the problem is before it's too late. So I've read the first issue. It's great. I love the cast. The fact that you somehow involved both Blue Beetles is pretty spectacular. I'm a Jaime guy. Shockingly, I'm guessing, Julio definitely is too.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating team with some expected people that show up, aka Kate Kane, Batwoman. I am curious as to how this project in specific came together for you. Was this something you were pitched on? Did you approach them? What's the origin of this?
I think, it was a very unique situation in that I almost got to make my bones a little bit working on Renee stuff beforehand. I wrote a 3-part story for Batman Brave and the Bold. That was almost like the capper to Renee's time as commissioner, drawn wonderfully by Andy McDonald, who I've known a long time. But even before that, I wrote a short that was part of Lazarus Planet. I think it was the Legends Reborn issue with Clayton Henry, where Renee has to begrudgingly put on the Question costume to solve a crime, like stop a serial killer that has been amped up as part of the event. So that was really fun. But I had pitched my editor, Paul Kaminsky, on the Question a while ago. And I think it was around the time I wrote that first one. And that pitch, just was around. And, he liked it. And we talked about some other stuff. And then as the All In initiative started, we were talking about maybe ways of working together. And he's like, well, there's this thing you sent me a while ago. And I think it fits really well if you can find a way to do it on the Watchtower. Like, can you bring Renee onto the Watchtower? And obviously the bigger machinations made it possible, Vandal Savage and just the bigger Justice League stuff that was happening. And so I took a pass at reworking it to fit it into the All In stuff, and it clicked. And that's when it clicked. And that's, you never know what's going to happen. Like, this was something I had pitched forever ago because I love the character. And I think, Renee is really conducive to the kind of stories I like to tell. I'm kind of tired of the term messy, but she is messy in the way that we were all messy. Like, she's got a lot of complicated backstory, not just in the continuity sense, but she's a character that has, been through some stuff and dealt with some stuff, and I think what I love about her is that she's changing in the way that Matt Murdock changes too, maybe even to a bigger degree, in that she makes mistakes, she learns from those mistakes and kind of pushes forward. And I find that hugely relatable. But that's kind of how it happened. And then Kian came aboard, and I was so excited that he was up for doing it, because I think he was stoked too to do something that is a little bit big picture in terms of the DC universe. It is a love letter to the DC universe, and in very much in the characters that we chose to work on and have be Renee's like ad hoc team. But also it's a gritty story in this unlikely setting, and that's what I'm a big believer of noir. Noir can exist anywhere. You can do like a sci-fi noir. You can do like a cheerleading noir. Megan Abbott's done it. You can do the joke I use, like a Care Bears noir. Like, noir is an idea. It's a concept. It's not a genre,
Mm-hmm. I do have to say one thing that might not appeal to Kian is the fact that doing a story on the Watchtower in this era is just basically cursing yourself to having to do, if not crowd scenes, near crowd scenes constantly.
Yeah, that was the challenge with like Spider Society too. Like, it's very easy for me to type, "Hey Scott, draw the entire Spider Society doing this thing." It's that you basically like caused him like 3 days of work. And the same thing happened with Kian. I think there's like a splash in issue 1 where you see the promenade, and I sent him a list of about 20 characters that I wanted him to include, obviously like in concert with Paul and Jillian, who's also in editing the book.
Did he just scan his middle finger and send it back to you?
Thankfully, like, no, but I mean, maybe he was cursing through editorial, but I try to keep it interesting. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard because you're throwing so many characters in there that you hope the artist is excited to draw. And I think I did have that caveat. Like, if there's anyone you want to throw in there that you think is cooler, by all means do that. But it's fun. I mean, and that's really the gist of like the team that's around Renee. It's like, these are characters that I love. Like, I'm a Ted Cord guy, but also a Jaime guy. Like, I was so excited when Jaime showed up and became the next Blue Beetle, and I love their dynamic together. And I think that there isn't really a superhero run that I love more than Grant's Animal Man. And so it's always spoken to me, and Jeff Lemire's Animal Man. And I think that's a character that I can relate to a lot, being a dad, but also I think he's got the same thing that Renee does. Like, he makes mistakes and he screws up, and then he learns from those mistakes and hopefully he does better. And I think Ted does that too, to some degree.
I may have been creeping on your LinkedIn page just to confirm this, but from what I understand, you had started at DC in January 2006, which was right before 52 happened. I do think it's interesting. That was also right when Infinite Crisis was ending. So your cast prominently features a character who went through a massive transformation during 52, which is Renee Montoya becoming the Question. And then also Blue Beetle, Jaime Reyes' creation.
And Batwoman.
And Batwoman, exactly, yeah. So you have 3 primary cast members who are kind of from like this really formative time for the publisher, but also a formative time for you in your career. And I'm not saying that's why, but when I saw that, I was like, this kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I hadn't really even thought of it that way, but I think it's very true. Like, Batwoman, the introduction of Batwoman, what Greg was doing in 52 and then doing with J.H. Williams, that's one of the runs I just go back to because it's beautifully illustrated, but it's also such an amazing introduction of this iconic part of the Bat mythos of the DC universe, and Jaime as well. And yeah, Animal Man, I remember coming back to DC around 2013 to oversee the PR stuff. And that's when the New 52 stuff was happening. And that I really resonated with Jeff Lemire and all the great artists he was working with. Steve Pugh, I think Travel Corman did the initial arc.
He did.
But I really loved his Animal Man because it stood out in such a fun way, similar to Scott Snyder's Swamp Thing. And there were just titles that felt very different. from I think the mainline New 52 stuff. But yeah, those characters were really important at the time, and 52 was just such a game changer. It felt like such a different. It was a writer's room. Like now in retrospect, we can say it's a writer's room that did a weekly book, but it felt so groundbreaking at the time.
Yeah. You look back on it and you're just kind of like, how the hell did that even happen? But I'm glad it did.
I don't know. I mean, I think there was a lot of talk in house of like, are we going to do this? Like, are we going to miss a week? And that was just a testament to like Steve Wacker and Mike Siglane, the editors that really like championed that thing. And I mean, the talent, Keith Giffen, Mark Waid, Grant, Greg, Jeff, it was just unstoppable.
Yeah. So for you, the lead is Renee Montoya. You talked about Batman, the animated series earlier. Like Renee is one of those characters where whether it's in the question form or in Renee Montoya form, just like regular, like commissioner of Gotham or whatever position she's in, she's this one that she's one of those characters that has a really passionate fan base. What is it about that character that you think stands out so much? Because not every character gets like the adoration that she does.
I think it's that, she's not afraid to challenge authority, even if she's a part of like the machinery. Like she's a cop. She's been a homicide detective. She was commissioner of Gotham City. I think a lot of it goes back to what Greg and Ed Brubaker did in Gotham Central, like to present her as this complicated, three-dimensional character. She's got family drama. She's got personal drama. She's got addiction issues that are handled very thoughtfully. It's not a situation where, oh, let's, for drama's sake, let's have her relapse, or let's have her be this hard drinking PI or hard drinking character. She does do that, but it's always in service to the greater arc and her greater progression. And I think she's human. She feels flawed. She just feels like thought out. And I think that's also true of Kate. Like she's just got this like complexity that sometimes gets lost or can easily get lost in superhero comics. And I know I go back to her when she's done well. And I think a lot of people do.
I was going to bring up the word human because I'm not saying that DC is not capable of this, but a lot of times it's the gods. It's like the big characters that are like untouchable. It's not like Marvel where it's the world outside your window and all that. Renee Montoya is a very human character in an unusual way in DC because she's like almost all flaws, but it makes her more relatable. She's also extremely capable. But I did want to ask, one of the fascinating things about this Justice League Unlimited era is the fact that literally you could draw 20 people in this script, and like that wouldn't just you being over the top because I want to see the all of Doom Patrol in this scene or something like that.
I do now.
Like now you do. That is,
Yeah.
I mean, like that's what this era is all about. So you had lots of options. What made the cast you built out the right picks?
Well, I just want to touch on that point you brought up. I think the contrast between the gods, quote unquote, of Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and the iconic Justice League and Renee is part of what makes it interesting. She feels completely out of her depth, but she's also so driven and confident. Like she has flaws. She understands she can screw up, but there's a confidence there that I think a lot of people can relate to as well. Like she's like, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to do the best I can. And she's going to have her doubts, but she's going to power through.
And the gods turn to her when they need something.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a huge vote of confidence. And building up the cast, selfishly, a lot of it was like characters I really loved and I wanted to write. But also I wanted to tap into that sweet spot of characters that also felt a little overwhelmed. Like I wanted to humanize Ted Kord a little bit. I think I love that he is a punchline in many things, but I think there's also a three-dimensionality to him that I like to explore. Like I love the Len Wein stuff. I think the classic JLI stuff, everyone notes it's a comedy book, but there's a lot of character development that happens there. And there's a lot of stuff that happens there where you see him as this character that has had his fortune taken away from him, that is trying really hard to live up to this legacy, like the Dan Garrett stuff and the previous Blue Beetle. So I really wanted to put together, it almost feels like a police procedural. You have this great cast that are all playing off each other, like Law and Order and The Wire too, like this group of people that are trying to work in this bigger infrastructure, obviously not to liken the problems of Baltimore to, what's happening on the Justice League Watchtower, but, really human characters that are in over their heads and trying to figure out what's going on. Obviously, the Kate Kane, Renee stuff, there's a lot of history there, but I wanted to explore that in a thoughtful way, not just in a drama heavy, like, oh, my ex is on the team. There's that, obviously, but it's also like, these are people trying to be friends. And now you've added this wrinkle of, okay, we have to work together. And I didn't sign up for this. There's a moment in the first issue where Renee's like, wait a second, you built a team for me. And she doesn't respond well to that. She doesn't respond well to being told what to do without having input. And so how does she grapple with that? It's a lot of new job vibes. And I've been there. I'm sure you've been there, where you've taken this job that you're not really sure you're qualified for. It definitely does remind me of those early DC days. Literally, as an employee, I was like, am I ready for prime time here? And so I've been channeling a lot of those feelings. And I think those are very universal, relatable feelings. And then you realize like you're on this team with people that you had no hand in picking. And I think that can be good. Like, you obviously have Jaime, who's great. You have Buddy, and then once you start going to Ted Cord and Kay Kane, I think Renee has her doubts. Like, this is maybe not who I would have chose.
I do. I like that. I don't remember the term is. There's a procedural term. I actually talked to Gene Ha and Xander Cannon about it for this feature I did on Top 10, because it was something they tried to incorporate into that. It's like a walk around or something like that. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, walk and talk. Yeah.
Walk and talk. That's it. Walk and talk. So
it's a very West Wing thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that you have kind of like a walk and talk in there where you kind of introduce the cast as the question is kind of going through there. That's a really great way to like bring everybody into it. But, I think it's funny. One of the things when I first read the solicit, when it was first announced, in my mind, it was literally her going to be solving a murder mystery. But I mean, there will be that maybe to some degree if people have read the first issue. But then B, there's also like the core thing isn't actually that a human is under threat. It's the Watchtower itself, right? I think that makes it a much different book, and it's very interesting. Did you have that when you were trying to reformat your original idea onto the Watchtower? What made that the right play?
I think it just ups the stakes. Like, I think what people expect is, oh, it's Renee solving a singular murder and the Watchtower is the backdrop. And I thought it would be more interesting if the crime is not, it's just very easy to be like, I'm going to kill superhero X. And then the 10 fans that love this obscure character are going to get mad and it's going to be a big mystery. But I feel like that's been done very well in many ways before. And if the mystery is something is trying to tap into this haven that the Justice League have built for superheroes, this place where anyone can be and anyone can feel community, like, who's doing that? Why are they doing that? And you have to be a pretty serious threat to circumvent the Justice League, and then circumvent them so much that they are baffled and they have to go to Renee and say, can you figure this out for us? Because we are getting nowhere. I mean, it's not easy for Batman, A, to say he can't solve something, and then B, admit to someone he can't solve something. And I think that's, like we were saying, is a big motivator for her. Like, they picked me. And so now I have to step up. Like, what a huge responsibility that is. And I think people are going to be really surprised when we slow burn and reveal who the threat is. And there's a definite clue in issue 1. There's a definite clue in issue 2. And then by the time you get to the big reveal, hopefully people are surprised, but also realize that this is a meaningful threat.
Yeah, I do want to say I know you work in marketing, because instead of saying an example of a random character that 10 people love, you said obscure character X. So you didn't get yelled at by the fans of obscure character X.
Yeah,
you could have said anything in there and people would be like, justice for, I don't know, a character from Bloodlines.
Yeah. Could we have killed like El Diablo, who I love? I think is a cool character. I guess so. But I think part of the fun of the story is the suspense, like building the suspense and the uncertainty of what the threat is. And I'm glad that you mentioned the walk and talk, because I think first issues are so much harder now because you have such a limited runway. Like, the marketplace is what it is, and ongoing series are fewer and far between. So if you spend that first issue like setting everything up, that's 25% of your story, maybe 20% of your story if you've got a 5-issue series. A little bit less because we have a little more runway there, but the first issue counts for so much that if you spend it just not vamping, but just playing table setting, it's harder to get people invested. And so what I tried to do with that issue, and what Kian did masterfully, was make everything as active as possible and serving the bigger story. Yeah, so it's hard.
It is incredibly difficult when you think about it, because people, I'm not saying that creators are adamantly against it or for it or whatever, but like the environment that we're in is that there's a lot of miniseries out there. And like you're saying, it's like if you have a 4-issue miniseries, your first issue not only needs to introduce the entire cast and the threat, what you're dealing with, but it also has to have enough of a hook that people are going to pick up 2nd issue, 3rd issue, 4th issue. You have to like do all those things in one place, and that's typically 20 pages. And also, I mean, not to make it an economics thing, but make it worth $3.99 or $4.99 or however much it is.
It totally is an economics thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a very tough line to walk. And like, I don't know. I mean, that's one of the things I always think is really fascinating about that shift towards miniseries is like, that puts a lot of pressure on the creative team to like really, I mean, you always have to deliver in your first issue, but when it's an ongoing, I think there's like an understanding that you can build a little slower.
Well, the difference for something like that, like Dick Tracy was always an ongoing. So we knew like we could kind of slow burn some of this stuff and think ahead to the second arc, the third arc. And the challenge, I think, was something like The Question, or, and The Question is not unique in being a miniseries in a bigger superhero universe, is that you also have to have that connective tissue. Like you have to reintroduce Renee, but you also have to show that Renee has been part of this world and this universe for a long time without bogging down the reader in a crash course into continuity. Like, in the opening issue, and the preview pages are online, so I'm not spoiling anything. She like flips through a photo album. So you kind of get the highlights of like her relationships and her dynamics, and you tee up some stuff that's going to happen. And I'm not saying we do it perfectly, but it is hard. You have to really make every page count in that first issue because it has to matter, but it also has to reintroduce a character. It has to introduce a character. There's a lot of moving pieces. So yeah, I feel empathy for all number one issues out there.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of empathy for them as well. But okay, let's talk about the world of novels. Alter Ego, your upcoming novel that's set in the world of comic books, is arriving on December 3rd, I believe.
Yes.
It's a sequel to your book, Secret Identity. And instead of doing the solicit is very long, I'm going to do my own abbreviated version about it.
Yeah, please.
It's about Annie Bustamante, a hyphenate and comic book artist. That is one of her hyphens, and her journey to work on her beloved The Legendary Links and the complicated rights and dark truth connected to this character she loves. Many mysterious situations and sketchy players are involved, and Bustamante has to navigate all of them in this thriller that I said arrives on December 3rd. I want to start with a fusion of different loves there. You already did Secret Identity. This is a sequel to that. But the idea of marrying the world of comics and like thriller novels is a fascinating one to me because like if somebody thinks about a comic book artist, I say this with respect to comic artists, I don't think most people think thriller novels.
Right. It's not the most active career choice. Yeah.
But I do love it. I do love it. How did you end up fusing those together, and what made you want to do that once again with this book?
It was hard. I was really proud of Secret Identity in that it got the critical response that I appreciated. It did well. It resonated with readers and fans. And when I wrote it, I thought, well, this is it. This is a standalone. It's going to be there. It's going to be one of those perennial books for me that people will think comics and mystery, and that'll be it. And maybe it still will be. But as I was finishing the draft, my editor said, there's another beat here that I think you might want to consider hitting, which is like what happens to the links, like what happens to the character, what happens to Carmen in the modern day. So without spoiling anything about Secret Identity, there's an epilogue there that as I was writing it and as I was having this reporter basically interview Carmen about what her world is like, I thought there's another mystery here. There's a thriller here. There's an IP story. I am personally fascinated, and maybe you are too, by intellectual property and how these ideas and characters that live on for 80, hundreds of years, how they are developed and repurposed and reimagined and reworked, like even, things like Miracle Man, The Shadow, Dick Tracy to some degree, characters that evolve and change to fit the times and the ownership, and how sometimes the owners have the best interests of the IP at heart, and sometimes they just don't understand it. And so what happens to this idea that this woman created in secret and wants to reclaim? What happens to that IP in an era very different from 1975 when IP is king? Mm-hmm. Like any idea could be the next billion-dollar franchise. And so Alter Ego starts with that reporter speeding home with this interview with Carmen Valdez, who's the protagonist of Secret Identity, literally playing in her car as she's trying to upload it to the cloud, and she's run off the road and killed. Because that idea that Carmen has a stake in this character is something that whoever this bad element doesn't want out there. And then we jump forward to meet Annie, who is a filmmaker, but also has a backstory as a comic book artist. And she had some great runs in comics, and she just moved on. She just did other things. She started making movies, and she's in this creative lull when between projects because her last movie was shelved for tax reasons, which I thought was kind of funny and timely. And she's been drawing this fan comic of the Lynx because that's the comic that got her into comics as a creative person and as a fan. And that's when she's approached by this, not to get too plot into it, but that's when she's approached by this company that is revamping the Lynx IP, and they want her to relaunch it. And so it feels like a dream come true in the way that that can sometimes feel like. But then she starts getting messages from this unknown sender named Apparition, which is a character in the Lynx mythos, basically warning her off working on it. And so as she gets deeper into the project, she starts to discover that there's more to this character than it just went off the grid and nobody developed it for decades. And she has to, it's about art and commerce. Like, she wants to do the art thing because she loves this character and she wants to add to this legacy. She doesn't the business side of it doesn't fully understand what they have. And there might be some more menace under there that she has to grapple with.
I do think the world of IP, to be honest, I really don't like saying IP.
I don't
and
either,
intellectual. Yeah, it's so icky. It's just like, I know I saw an interview where somebody, well, it's like, I don't know, like, it's like another word, content. Whenever you kind of boil things down to those words, it just feels wrong and icky. It's like, oh yeah, I have this new piece of IP. I'm like, it's called a story. You've written a story. Yeah. But anyways, that world of IP, like specifically using that phrase, I think is important in this situation because IP is the type of thing, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I mean, it's literally what the book is about, somebody would kill over, because it's like, if you have the rights to something that is worth $1 billion, all of a sudden it becomes something representative of violence or something representative of being worth something that you could kill over. And I do think that that's really interesting, especially because, like, I may be terribly misremembering this. I was trying to Google it as we were talking. I feel like in the early days of comics, there was like a mafia element to it where like where like some of the rights were owned by mafia. And it's interesting because back then you probably look at that as like a very dangerous element. Thank God we've gotten to this point now. But now you have something maybe even more dangerous, which is mega corporations that own them. And like, I'm not saying any corporation would kill over IP, but you know, you could definitely tell a story that makes it believable.
Yeah, and it's also the idea of using creativity as a means to an end. Like, you get the sense very early on, like within the first few chapters, that this new Triumph Entertainment, which claims to be a continuation of the Triumph comics from Secret Identity, they want Annie there because people know her and people know that she's a fan. But once she starts pushing back and giving feedback and giving notes and kind of setting the boundaries of the creative exchange, they're not as keen on it. And I think that's a microcosm for a lot of creative and business conversations. You know, you say, hey, creator, like, do you have a pitch for X character? And the creator says, yes, but it's got to be this and this and this. And that's, you know, it often works out and you often get really amazing stories. This is an example of it not working out because obviously it's a thriller and bad people are doing bad things because it's a thriller. But I think it also is not that hard to believe.
Are you reading Chip Zdarsky's Public Domain?
Yes. Chip and I have talked about this a few times. We're friends. And it's just so funny that we were in this similar headspace. I love Public Domain. And we've joked about maybe doing something where, you know, the links in the domain can interact. I mean, this is just like nothing actually happening, but it's so funny when creators are in that similar headspace because he's playing in the same world where it's a comic about a comic and then that comic becomes a comic.
Right.
And it's so cool to see that because it is fascinating. I love comics business stuff. I mean, I've worked in the business for a long time and it's not a muscle that I want to atrophy, you know, that kind of marketing biz dev brain. And I think it served me as a creator too. But I think the history of that is so fascinating, like companies and how they evolve and how companies that come and go, like companies like Atlas Comics coming back. I was very flattered when Heidi in the Beat said, this looks like something ripped out of the pages of Secret Identity when she talked about Atlas Comics coming back, because that happens, like stuff like this happens. It's not it's very believable.
I do think it's funny though with Public Domain and Alter Ego and Secret Identity, they're like kind of two sides of the same coin, except for one is like the sad human version with Public Domain, and then yours is like the thriller mystery version. But I mean, I guess that kind of lends it to the flexibility of the concept and all the different things you can do with it. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Zoop is where some of the biggest names in comics are crowdfunding. Live campaigns this month include The Art of Dave Dorman, Camilla D'Errico's Paroby art book, with Megaton Man Omnibus from Fantagraphics and Don Simpson, Molds from Steve McGarry and Rick Stromowski, and more. More campaigns are coming soon to Zoop from Joe Quesada, Alex Segura, Michael Marisi, Dean Kotz, as well as the relaunch of Hack Slash the card game on Zoop's partner platform, GameFound. Zoop would like to thank all the creators who have recently submitted projects and urge more creators to submit your project to Zoop. Click the Submit Your Project link at zoop.gg, as they are providing services to even more creators than ever before. And now, back to the show. When you're building out one of these stories, like this, the lead in this book is Annie Bustamante. You mentioned Carmen Valdez before, like for Secret Identity. How much of what you build your stories around is having that dynamic lead to kind of hang your hat on?
Oh man, it's like 90%. I will be very honest with you. I had a lot of conversations with my editor, Zach Wagman, who is a very patient and understanding and smart guy, where I was like, I don't know if this is going to happen. Like, this is really hard. Like, sequels are hard if you want to do them well. Like, it would have been very easy, not creatively fulfilling, to do Carmen in the 80s, like investigating the indie comics boom, or Carmen in the 90s, like reacting to the image revolution. Like, I didn't want to do the story where it's Carmen walking through comic book history and playing Carmen Sandiego, for lack of a better term, like, just investigating the mysteries of comic book history. I wanted the sequel to feel like it had to exist, and it didn't rehash Secret Identity. And so it was a lot of conversations with Zach about that. And he's like, you just need to find your way in. And so it was really like 10% of the story was there. I knew it was going to be more of a thriller, like a Hitchcockian thriller, as opposed to this moody period piece noir that Secret Identity was. But none of it really clicked until Annie showed up. And I knew, I kind of had a rough idea of who she was. And then she literally walked into my brain. And I know that sounds a little new agey, but I feel like if you set the table creatively for a story, then your lead shows up and you hope that lead is compelling enough to kind of pull you through the narrative. And that's what she did. And so once I knew she was an artist, whereas Carmen was a writer, and she wasn't in comics anymore, she had left comics and had found great success doing something else because she just didn't have a home in the industry. She didn't find a place because of personal things. She was going through her own like addiction issues and recovery, and she became a parent. So things just kind of pushed her away from comics. So that felt really fascinating to me. Like, what is the one thing that would pull you back? Whereas in Secret Identity, what is the one thing that would compel Carmen to solve a crime? It's the character. So the Lynx is like that unifying thing for them. The Lynx is what made Carmen take the risk of creating a character on her own and then investigating it, because it was so much her character. And the Lynx was really the only thing that would have pulled Annie back into comics, because nostalgia is a hell of a drug. Like, it's the kind of thing that will pull you into things that maybe you would otherwise have moved past,
I do think it's interesting thinking about all of your disparate projects and kind of how, I mean, this is not uncommon. This is how creative people work. This is how humans work. But if you think about all the different projects, from the NPR book from Planet Money, or Dick Tracy, or The Question, or Alter Ego, the thing that unites it is you kind of like fusing disparate interests together, where it seems like Alter Ego and Secret Identity are you marrying your love of comics, comic history, the complicated world of IP with a thriller mystery concept. I don't want to make it seem like you're just like cravenly like just smashing pieces of Play-Doh together and just being like, let's do this. This is a fusion. But is that just kind of how your brain works when it comes to storytelling?
I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about, like obsession as the motivator to be creative. Like, even some of my lesser known projects, like Bledo, if like organized crime meets vampires, like it's not always that basic, but it is like, what is going to bring me to do this stuff, to do the work. And I love the world building. Like, in my head canon, all my creator owned stuff exists in the same universe. Like, that might be news to some of my collaborators. So, like, think of them as like these singular projects, but to me, it's like it's all happening together in the same way that like Pete Fernandez, my PI character, I thought he exists with all these other private eye characters, and I would like drop references to them. And it's just like, I love the universe building stuff. And I love that we've created this comic book that is based on a comic from a novel that maybe you haven't even read when you pick up that comic. Like, it feels like very cool to the 12-year-old in me. And it's those little added world building, like meta details that make it fun. So a lot of it is blending these things that maybe didn't exist together before. And that's what makes it more interesting to me as a writer to kind of play with them together.
I love that you go the extra mile and you don't just make the book, but you're like, I'm going to make the comic in the book. Because you did the Legendary Links, which is a collection of, at Mad Cave, of your comics that originated on Zestworld. That is an in-world comic from Alter Ego with you, it's you and Sandy Jarrell. I love that stuff. I think that that stuff is so enriching and it's so fascinating, but it's also like kind of indicative of how your brain works, where it's like, you have this opportunity. Why not go all out?
Yeah, I mean, I love that stuff. I love when I read something that feels layered and has connective tissue to other things. And I mean, Sandy was the MVP of that. And the reason that it works is because he doesn't do it like a shtick. You know, he's not trying to imitate Frank Miller. He's trying to draw the way that he thinks he would have drawn at that time. So it feels very evocative, but it doesn't feel like a parody. And I think the challenge with the link stuff is that we literally took the pages we did for Secret Identity, which if you read those captions, it's like a page from the Legendary Links issue 3, like the last page. And so I laid it out into like a manifest almost. Like okay, so we have the first 2 pages of issue 1. We have the last page of issue 3. We have 2 pages from issue 4. How do we fill the space and make this narratively make sense beyond like my rough, like back of the napkin stuff while writing the novel, where I was like, okay, we'll do a 2-page sequence from issue 3. This is what it should be. And it became this very trippy, like supernatural, almost like Jim Starlin-y 70s comic, as opposed to what we thought it would be, which is like a gritty 70s, like Frank Miller or Doug Mensch, Bill Sienkiewicz, Moon Knight type story. And I think it was much richer for that. And then that feeds into Alter Ego with the apparition stuff. So I'm really proud of it as this little trilogy of things that if you read them together, great. It is additive and you can enjoy it. And if you read them separately, you can totally do that. I would say read them all together.
I'm starting to get the sense that one thing you like also is a challenge, which, you know, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, like the microface stuff was really challenging too. Like in terms of like, how do you tell the superhero story that is also educational in a business way?
Mm-hmm. And that's for listeners that don't know, that's the NPR Planet Money podcast comic, which is just a funny phrase. NPR Planet Money podcast comic.
Yeah, I love that it exists.
You never know where things are going to come from. I do have another patron question. Kelly Sudaconic actually asked,
oh, yay.
What advice would Alex have for scriptwriters interested in making the leap to a novel?
That's a good question. I would say my cheat code is that in the way you write a script for an artist, you know, the artist is visualizing your script. Be mindful that you are collaborating with a reader's imagination, like not to get too like trippy about it. You're in conversation with the reader's imagination. So you need to give them enough in terms of description that they can then visualize it. I think a lot of new prose writers shift into hyper detail. They will describe the person's shirt, like what shoes they're wearing, the weather. I only describe things that are really relevant to the plot. Like if that shirt is going to play a part at the end of the chapter, I will describe it. And I described Annie, I think very briefly, like she has brown hair. I don't talk about her height. I don't talk about anything else because I want the reader to create that visual with their mind. And I would say the time and dedication you put into a script, like put into prose and finish. It's easy to get bogged down in the details of writing a novel, but the hardest part is finishing. Once you finish that draft, then you can go back and like set up the furniture in the house, paint the walls, like make it look nice. And I would use the skills that I know scriptwriters have in comics and in screenwriting to plot things out. Like I made the mistake early on of thinking, well, I'm not going to have an outline. But then I soon realized I was not Stephen King or Michael Connelly or any of these guys or people that can write without a safety net, you know, like I needed that safety net. And so don't be afraid to give yourself like the framework to riff off and allow yourself to succeed because it'll save you so much time and heartache.
It seems like it's important to kind of know yourself and know that like, even if you love Stephen King or whomever, you don't have to work exactly like them.
Yeah. Everyone has their method and this may not work for you. Like you may take these notes and be like, oh God, this, you know, I can write a novel without any outline. Then look, more power to you because everyone has the method that works for them. And the only way you know if it works for you is if the books come out. So like,
You do have me a little worried now, though. I don't know if it ended up happening, but at the Eisner Awards this year, you told me Sketched actually ends up in Alter Ego. And so now you have me a little worried that when you said, like, don't include details unless they're, like, end up being important, hopefully I didn't kill anyone. I don't want to kill anyone.
You did. I think it's literally, there's a moment where, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's in the back half of the book where Annie is scrolling through something and she's like, and then they saw a headline from the website, Sketch, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's all legally vetted. It's something that could plausibly happen.
Okay. So. I hope it's about Stiltman.
No, but maybe. I don't know. I don't want to ruin it for you.
I know. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Just a couple more questions. I did want to talk about, I mentioned the legendary links and how it was, I told you this was coming. It was originated on Zestworld. Also, you're currently being crowdfunded on Zoop series with Michael Marisi and Dean Kotz. The Awakened originated on Zestworld. I hope you can finally answer this question for me because I have always wondered, what the hell was Zestworld?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm sad they're gone because they were really supportive of not only two of my books, but a lot of other books that I liked.
Yeah,
Zestworld happened, I think, in the wake of that burst of Substack comics where Substack was giving grants to creators to basically syndicate their comics via their Substack. I think that's where you saw Tiny Onion kind of come to be. I know a lot of other creators were there, and Substack created a similar platform where they basically, paid you to create comics that were digitally syndicated on their website. Unfortunately, it didn't work. I can't speak to the mechanics of the business side, but it just didn't, they ended what they were doing. And I had these two comics that were basically done. So it was a matter of like, I had always envisioned the links as a print thing, like something that would exist in print because it has to exist in print. It's literally a reprint of a comic from the 70s. So Mad Cave was up for that, which was great. And The Awakened, we were done. So, if you were a Zestworld subscriber, you got to read most of it, but we really wanted to make it available for people to read the whole story because it's a story that Mike and I are really proud of. The team has done a great job on. Really fun creative team. And so Zoop has provided a platform to crowdfund that to create a printed edition that you can hold. And I'm a big, hard copy fan. Like, I think if something has really added value when you can slide it onto your shelf. And so maybe selfishly, we just want to slide it onto our shelf and see it there with everything else.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I never really understood Zestworld because Substack made sense to me. They were basically using creators as advertisements for their platform. It's like, we pay you money, you bring your audience to this platform. That makes sense to me. Zestworld, I was always like, is it a newsletter thing? Is it a web or a comic platform? I just couldn't compute what all the different disparate parts added up to.
Well, I think it evolved over time. So that, quote unquote, evolved, that changed over time. I think at first it was a newsletter platform and, I brought my subscribers from my Substack to the Zestworld platform and used that as my newsletter platform while, working on these books. And then it became more of a web comics hub. And that's, I think it's hard. The market is hard, but I think people discover it maybe as they get into it. Like, it's hard to build these places where people congregate to read comics, especially digitally.
I mean, it's hard to build a place that people congregate, period, as social media has taught us recently. But I do think it's interesting, though, because I think a lot of people deride Substack, and I think a lot of people, like the comic side of Substack, and I think a lot of people deride Zestworld. But I think the thing that's interesting about it is one way or another, they helped you make two comics. And I think that's the cool thing.
I'm hugely appreciative to Chris and the whole team at Zestworld for, believing, pouring money into the arts is hard. It's hard to find those places that will support you. And I had never got an editorial note from them. It was very much do what you want to do. Like, we believe in you guys and we like what you've shown us. And obviously I had some material already for the links and we had some character designs and sketches for The Awakened. So it was great to have that platform and be able to tell the stories we wanted to tell with no oversight, no real editorial kind of mandate. And, it allowed us to create these two things we were passionate about that I don't think they could have found a home otherwise. I mean, I think I wrote about this in a newsletter recently, but it's not an easy sell to say, I've got this comic book that is a comic book from a novel I wrote about this character. And it really, you kind of have to read the novel to really understand the meta of it all. So, but that was also the challenge. How do we make this interesting as its own thing too?
It's interesting because I'm not saying that people wouldn't be interested in Daredevil in isolation. You're doing Enemy of My Enemy, the Daredevil book that's coming out in July. But to some degree, all of that stuff has to have like, you have to have some level of interest built in there from someplace, whether it's like the Netflix series in that case or the comics or whatever. And with like Legendary Links, it's like, you know, your potential audience is people who have read Secret Identity or Alter Ego, but also people who are just interested in comics. And maybe they won't get the full value if they don't read Alter Ego, but there's still the value there. There's always like kind of roadblocks. It's just, how do you turn those obstacles into advantages? I guess that's a big part of your job.
Yeah. And it's also believing in the work. And I think sometimes the road is not easy to get there. Like, you know, I think The Awakened, I'm not going to be humble about, shy about, we pitched everywhere. Like we shopped that book to everyone. And for whatever reason, people pass and they're just not into it. Superheroes are a hard sell. But I think if you believe in the material, you find a place for it. And then you just kind of push it through. It sounds very stubborn and spite driven, but
sometimes it has to be.
It has to be. You have to like, Dark Space in many ways, not to pivot too much, was I had always wanted to write a Star Trek novel, like that kind of like space opera, like vibe. And I never really got the opportunity for whatever reason. And it's not a criticism of the system, but I wanted to write the story. So you find a place for the story you want to write and you push through and you hope that it finds its audience. And, sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay, but you at least got it out there,
Yeah. Well, I just have one last question for you. This kind of ties everything together. Unfortunately, it also ties stubbornness together because I think that is an important part of all of this. It's a very interesting time to be a creator of anything, I think. I mean,
yes,
you've worked in comics both as a creator and on the publisher side. I do always have to mention it just because this was my jam. You even worked at Wizard Magazine once upon a time. You write novels. You do a little bit of everything. You're a hyphenate just like Annie Bustamante herself. Given that it's such a weird time, how do you balance all that? And how do you not kind of fall into the morose and just like lean into the stubbornness and say, I'm going to make this work? What guides you as you're trying to navigate these unusual times we find ourselves in?
It's funny. I was typing, I sent a message to some friends and we were just talking about like marketing advice, very similar to your top of the hour question. But I think you have to find your spaces. You have to find the ways to engage with your readers directly, whether it's a newsletter, it's a website, a Patreon, because just promotionally, like these algorithms will fail you at some point. And in the same way, as creators, we have to find ways to tell the stories we want to tell that we can control as well. Like I think we're in this very golden age where creators can connect with readers directly and engage with them, but it's still hard to get paid to tell stories. It's still challenging. And I think you have to make concessions when you partner with publishers, and that's just the business side. It's not a criticism. So I think you just have to find the path that is most true to the story you want to tell, and also realize that these relationships are not permanent. It's business. And if you treat it like a business, you have to always be mindful of what your next thing is and like keep those plates spinning. And I think I'm at a particularly very busy time where a lot of plates are spinning, and there probably will be times when not as many plates are spinning, and just, what's the saying? Like touch some grass, like be mindful of, just be mindful. I'm glad that I have two very small little creatures that kind of keep me pretty grounded, and like I complain about what I make for dinner, and that keeps me humble. And I think that's the balance. Like you keep yourself humble, do the work, and don't be afraid to pivot and do different things, because I think the mechanism of publishing wants you to be one thing and always be that thing and be the comp, like be easily comped and be easily like put in the bucket. But if you keep moving around, no one can define you, which is good.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're hard to define, Alex, but that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast to talk about Alter Ego, the question, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Always a treat. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Alex Segura. You can find him on Blue Sky and Instagram and his work in The Question, All Along the Watchtower, and The Legendary Links, as well as the upcoming novels Alter Ego and Enemy of My Enemy, a Daredevil Marvel crime novel. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Blue Sky and Instagram, or following me on Blue Sky and Instagram. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Chris, Brian, David Byrne, Milton Lawson, David Wilson, Joe, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story Webcomic, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Tom Evans, Rita Beeman, Kelly Sudacock, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Ryan Hole, Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rob V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Klaus Van de Ven, Submed Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Earl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon Pillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kingus, Nick Bennett, Susanna Polo, Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Hull, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalis, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Taw, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwald, Vita Yalek, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Jason Assey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Brawley, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed op panels, outro, and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.